The New York Knicks are going to be a lot better than what people expect. Let's get into this. If you guys enjoyed this video and want to see more NBA content just like this one, please hit that subscribe button and hit that post notification bell. But anyways, back to the video. When you look at any rebuilding team, the main focus of those teams is first and foremost is to make the playoffs with the young players that you acquire through the draft or through trades. And once you're able to make the playoffs in that first season is considered a success. And then the season after, then you really focus about making some noise in the playoffs. But the reasoning why it is considered a success to only make the playoffs and not really make much to any noise in the playoffs once you get there in your first season as a rebuilding team is because you want to give playoff experience to your younger players. You want to see how they react. Do they shrivel up? Are they playing well in the playoffs? Do they get scared when they get to the playoffs? You have to see how they react, and then that's how you really determine which players are going to be your star players going forward. And when you talk about the New York Knicks, that's exactly what they were able to do. After rebuilding for a very long time at this point, they were actually able to make it to the playoffs this previous season, make it all the way up to the 4th seed with all very young players. It's not like they signed some older players to one-year deals during the offseason. They've done this with all their younger players, which is very good to see, and now the next step for the Knicks would be to actually make some noise in the playoffs and make it deep into the playoffs. The biggest thing now for the New York Knicks is to actually look back at that playoff series against the Atlanta Hawks and see where they went wrong and really make those adjustments. But now let's quickly talk about what the Knicks didn't do well against the Hawks in that series. So of course their best player on their team last season, Julius Randle, just did not play well last season. And when your best player doesn't play well, especially in a playoff series, you're kind of doomed and you're probably not going to win that playoff series. But the good part about that is now Julius Randle definitely has a year of playoff experience under his belt. So now in the next season, hopefully the Knicks make the playoffs again this year. Now he has that experience and he knows how to deal with it a little bit better than he did last season when that was his first year in the playoffs. And similar to Julius Randle getting playoff experience, basically every other player in the Knicks were getting their first year in the playoffs as well, especially when you're talking about main guys like Emmanuel Quickley, Obi Toppin, and RJ Barrett. So obviously all those guys have never made the playoffs, and this is very critical to their growth. So now when you want to talk about a little bit of a more technical issue with the New York Knicks in that playoff series, in my opinion, it's more so the fact that Julius Randle didn't necessarily have that secondary or third guy to really take a ton of pressure off him and be a real ball handler that can score but also get his teammates involved as well. You could definitely say the Knicks did have D Rose in that playoff series, and D Rose completely played out of his mind, but there's two issues with that in my opinion. First of all, at this point in D Rose's career, he could definitely show stints of that, but I don't think you could necessarily play D Rose 30-35 minutes per game. In my opinion, D Rose is most effective when you're playing him 20 to 28 minutes per game, because then he kind of started to gas out and not play as well. What would happen a lot of times in the playoff series is in the first quarter and the first half of the game, D Rose would completely go off and really help his team out tremendously, but when it got late into the 4th quarter, he still played well overall, but it was definitely not at the same level that he was performing at in the first quarter and the first half. You could really tell that D Rose was completely getting gassed out. And even besides D Rose, I think you still need that third guy on the team. And when you look at what the Knicks were able to do, I think they actually brought in 2 different players that fill that need. Starting with the first player, I think that guy is Kemba Walker. And when you look at what the Knicks were able to bring him in for a 2-year, $18 million deal, that's absolutely amazing. I know Kemba Walker has definitely had injury concerns, but let's just say the worst case scenario, Kemba Walker is hurt for most of his career with the New York Knicks. I still think there's basically no risk to it, because even if that happens, you're only paying Kemba Walker $8 million per year, and it's definitely worth the risk when you're talking about the upside that this guy could potentially provide. But now let's talk about the upside. So I personally think that Kemba Walker is going to be an amazing addition for especially Julius Randle, because he's going to take so much pressure off Julius. Julius doesn't need to take the ball off the court anymore. Kemba Walker can really give the ball to Julius in the right spots, and Julius could create for himself or for others from there. But Kemba Walker also has the capability of scoring himself, as we all know. He's a great 3-point shooter. He's a very good mid-range shooter. He can get all the way to the basket. He can put up floaters. He's a very, very prolific offensive player, and I think that's definitely going to help out Julius Randle a lot. And if Julius Randle is struggling in one game in the playoffs or even during the regular season, you can really give the ball to Kemba Walker and really rely on Kemba Walker to not only score for himself, but also get your teammates involved as well. So I think Kemba was a huge pickup for the Knicks. But now let's quickly touch upon the other guy that the Knicks were able to bring in during this offseason, which is Evan Fournier. All the way back at the NBA trade deadline, when Evan Fournier was still playing for the Orlando Magic, Magic, I actually wanted the Knicks to go out and get Evan Fournier because I thought he'd be a great fit for the team. The first thing you think of when you think of Evan Fournier is just scoring ability. He's a ball handler that can hit that three-point shot, create for himself from that three-point shot, hit a pull-up mid-range shot, get all the way to the basket. He's not super athletic, obviously, but he can finish at the basket pretty effectively as well. He's a pretty good floater. He just can do everything on a 3-level scoring basis. But Evan Fournier could do a little bit more than just score. Besides his actual scoring ability, he's a pretty underrated passer. We've seen it a lot in Orlando and a little bit in Boston, where he was actually handling the ball and running the offense pretty effectively, finding open teammates, finding wide open teammates, corner threes, cutting to the basket, just being a pretty good point guard and a real floor general at times. Obviously, that's not his main role, but he could do that, and the fact that he could do that, I think takes a lot of pressure off a guy like, first of all, Kemba Walker, but also a guy like Julius Randle and RJ Barrett. It just helps out, obviously. In the new NBA, you always want players who are great ball handlers as well as being able to hit that three-point shot. And when you look at both Kemba Walker and Evan Fournier, they definitely do both of those things at a very high level. I think the Knicks actually took a page out of the Atlanta Hawks notebook, because when you look at what the Hawks have, that's exactly what they have. They have Trae Young, who obviously can handle the ball, but everybody else on his team could basically handle the ball as well, and everybody on that team could definitely hit threes. So I think the Knicks realized they needed more ball handlers from that series against the Hawks, as well as more three-point shooting, and I think they've definitely done both of those things by picking up both Kemba Walker and Evan Fournier. But I haven't even mentioned the second best player on the Knicks last season, which is RJ Barrett. Obviously last season he took a huge jump. In his rookie season, his biggest issue was the shooting ability, but last season he definitely improved that significantly and showed how much he worked during this offseason to improve his three-point shot. He was actually a very good catch and shoot three-point shooter, as well as his ability to get to the basket was always pretty good, but the fact that he added that three-point shot to his game, I think helped out Julius Randle a ton, and also is going to help out any other player on his team. So I think that's a big thing for RJ. Typically when players improve the most is during the offseason, and now RJ Barrett has one extra season, or one extra offseason I should say, to really work on his craft. I think the next step for RJ Barrett would actually be to create his own three-point shot. Obviously last season the big thing was he was able to catch and shoot, but now if he can create his own three-point shot, he would just be that much more valuable. So now overall, after the Knicks had a very successful season last year and clearly proved they have something there, making it all the way to the 4th seed, their biggest issue, obviously as I mentioned before, was their playmaking, just not having an extra playmaker out there and some shooting as well. And when you look at what they were able to do during this offseason, they were able to add Kemba Walker, so that solves the issue of having another primary ball handler. Going to take a ton of pressure off Julius Randle, RJ Barrett, everybody else on the team. Then you talk about bringing in Evan Fournier, who's a great shooter but could also handle the ball as well. That's going to be a huge addition. Then when you talk about Quentin Grimes, who they drafted, who's a 3-and-D, you're bringing in more shooting like that. I think basically all the main issues that the Knicks had, they completely solved. Now, just like everything else, there are obviously a few downsides to picking up Kemba Walker and Evan Fournier, and one of those things are, last season the New York Knicks were a great defensive team, maybe one of the best, if not the best defensive team in the league, and that was clearly their strength. So obviously bringing in both Evan Fournier and Kemba Walker, who both struggle on the defensive end, is definitely going to hurt the Knicks on the defensive side of the ball. But what I would say is, when you have a great defensive team overall, you could definitely hide the defender, at least one defender on your defense. When you look at actually the Atlanta Hawks, they were effectively able to hide Trae Young on the defensive side of the ball. They would just throw him on Reggie Bullock, and the fact that Reggie Bullock couldn't do anything else besides catch and shoot made it pretty easy for the Hawks. So the Knicks could definitely do something similar to that on a guy who's just a 3-and-D guy. They could put Kemba Walker on him or Evan Fournier and get away with that pretty easily. But overall, I think the Knicks had a pretty good offseason this year, and I'm very excited to see what they're able to do next season, because I definitely think they're going to be a much better team than they were last year. I know definitely the Eastern Conference has gotten a lot better. Basically every team has gotten better, but I think that's the same to be said with the Knicks. I think they were the 4th seed last year, obviously a very good team, but I think they're a much better team this year than they were last year. But we'll see what happens. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think the Knicks are going to be a much better team this season than they were last season, or do you not agree? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, please leave a like and subscribe and hit that post notification bell. It really helps me out a lot. Until the next time, peace out guys.